Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, November 6th, 2021, and today we are going to be talking about the major infrastructure package that just passed the United States House of Representatives last night in a vote of 228, I believe 228, to a vote of 206. The House of Representatives passed this bill, and it required Republican votes to pass. And with that understanding that it required Republican votes to pass, we call this bipartisan. Now, there is a bit of discussion here about whether or not this is doing enough on the Democratic side, but at the end of the day, this is one of Joe Biden's main pieces of legislation that he has been aiming to pass for quite some time now. This is one of the most vigorous spending bills for the United States when it comes down to historical context, when it comes down to what is being proposed and what actually was passed. The fact that this passed is a major win for the Biden administration, and now it's up to them to spin it in their favor. And I'll talk about what I mean by that at the end of the video. But looking at the infrastructure bill, this is something that received bipartisan support primarily because it benefits almost all Americans. When you're looking at what is actually in this bill, if you took away the partisan standing and you took away the dollar sign, you could probably not find any Americans that opposed the contents of the bill. The main reason why there were votes against it on the Republican side was because of, number one, it was being proposed by the Democratic Party. I think that many of these Republicans did not want Joe Biden to have a win, and after seeing what happened in the state of Virginia, they know that when the Biden administration falls, so do Democratic candidates. But that wasn't enough to push away these 13 Republicans that voted for the bill. But in addition to those 200, while it may not necessarily be just preventing Joe Biden from having a strong legacy, maybe more, that they just did not want to spend $1 trillion. It does seem like a lot of money, and it absolutely is a lot of money, and that was a main concern of the Republicans who voted against it in the United States Senate, that this was going to be a waste of money. It was going to add to the deficit, which is true. It's a fair statement, and it is a fair argument. But at the same time, the Democrats were counter-arguing by saying, we have something more important than just the federal deficit. We have something more important than just withholding our money. This is what the Democratic Party has been trying to argue, and it won over 19 United States senators from the GOP. Surprisingly enough, despite the House having, way more, 4 times the members of Republicans in the House as they do in the Senate, they actually got less votes in the House of Representatives because it was more hotly contested. But at the end of the day, they did get 13 Republican votes. But for the Democrats who voted against it, I know you might be confused about that. Why are there 6 Democrats here who voted against it? Well, these Democrats are pretty much saying that this bill does not go enough. All of these 6 votes were from partisan progressive Democrats. And I don't mean to say partisan with that negative connotation that comes with it. I simply mean that they are partisan Democrats. These are not people who vote against party line, traditionally speaking. They are just primarily those who are more left-leaning than the rest of the party, which means that when they come down to a bill like this, yes, at surface level, they would seem for it, but they do not think it does enough. So they vote against it, but ultimately it was not enough to prevent this bill from passing. And for a brief period of time, when I say brief, I mean a month and a half, the progressives in the Democratic Party held this over Nancy Pelosi's head. Because the majority is so slim in the House of Representatives, the progressives hold a lot of power. Because there are more than just 4 now. There is a substantial number of them who are willing to hold out on voting for bills simply because they want them to do more. But the problem is, the United States Senate will not pass more, and thus you enter into a gridlock. The Senate will pass one version of the bill, then the progressive Democrats say, no, send it back. We want a different version with more. Well, the Senate already tried that and shot it down, so they'll shoot it down again. So then they pass a more comprehensive and less extensive version of the bill, send it to the House, and it's this self-reinforcing cycle that requires one thing to break unless there's an interjection from the Republican Party. And that's exactly what happened here. If this was a party vote, this bill would have failed. But because it was not a strict party line vote, the Democrats were able to pass it. And Joe Biden, I think, is very happy about this because when it passed the United States Senate, he essentially said this was a major step moving forward. All of the people who were analysis members of the Biden administration knew that this would be the step towards a major victory for the Biden White House. And the fact that it passed last night, I don't necessarily think is too much of a coincidence either. I mean, you're talking about something that has been, sure, in the works for quite some time now, but people were starting to realize over the past 2 months that people don't know what Joe Biden has done. When you talk about COVID-19 stimulus checks, okay, that was earlier on in the year. When you talk about mask mandates on federal property, okay, earlier on in the year. Almost all of Joe Biden's substantial pieces of legislation that has passed or gone through executive order have happened within his first 100 days. And you can see that with the Biden promise tracker hasn't changed since the first 100 days. The promises kept at 12% has not changed over the past from the first 100 days of his presidency. And I think that is a very telling sign that it is very difficult to know what Joe Biden has done between then and now, except for this infrastructure package, which Joe Biden has been riding heavy on and is now allowing this to be the major center front of the media. You know, when you're talking about something that a president might personally oppose, they obviously would not want this to be a major thing. But he's the one who actually put it forth. He wanted this to happen. And I'm sure that this is something that many Republicans are upset about, not because it is going to benefit Americans, more so because it benefits the Biden administration and could help recover his approval rating, which again, we will get to near the end of the video. But looking at the reason why I think this is also so important is because even those internal in the Biden camp, in the Biden administration, know that voters are largely clueless about the president's accomplishments. This was in July. This was closer to the first 100 days of the presidency than it is now. But the thing is, looking at this, it just hasn't changed. Voters are still largely clueless about the president's accomplishments. That's why Democrats have to constantly remind their own constituents of this is what is being done. If people don't know what is being done by the mainstream media, if people think that all they do is take pictures of themselves walking around the White House, and I mean quite literally, there is probably a subsection of America that believes they do no more than photo ops at this point in time. They are clueless, and they believe that this administration is doing nothing with a trifecta. At surface level, this seems bad for the White House, and it is bad because voters take things on a surface level understanding. You know, you watching this video already puts you into an exclusive group within the United States where you are actively seeking out more political information. But when it comes down to the average voter in Florida, Texas, California, New York, you know, it doesn't really matter. When it comes down to the average voter, can you imagine them watching a video talking about Joe Biden's passage of the infrastructure bill? Can you imagine them watching a video talking about what Joe Biden has done on the 15th of August, 2021? The only thing they get are the headlines, and the only thing they understand is that Democrats have practical full control of the Senate and the House of Representatives, but does the average American know what the filibuster is? Does the average American understand that progressives want to do more for the Democrats than they do in terms of Republicans voting against it for different reasons, but together it looks like the 206 vote is in unison and all together? You know, these are things that you might pick up on, someone watching this video, but the average American would not. And that's what the Biden administration needs to understand, that all that matters in terms of outward thinking and outward exposure is simply what you give to the media. And major accomplishments are loved by the media. And that's why every single reputable news source is picking up this infrastructure bill, because it was deemed bipartisan because of the Republican crossover votes, checkbox number 1 for Joe Biden, and it passed. So checkbox number 2. The fact it was bipartisan and it passed through both means it's going straight to his desk. And I can tell you, he already has that pen ready. He is going to sign off on it immediately, and he's going to send it out. And it is going to take into effect. But this is something that Biden also is very big on: unity and inter-party relationships. And I think that that is a huge part of his campaign. That was a huge part of his campaign, and it is a huge part of the way that he governs. When you take a look at the way that he is very big on working with Republicans, it seems like he's taking a more moderate and more centrist approach, which is a valid argument. But I do think that when it comes down to public perception, you'd rather have things more well known as bipartisan than you would as just narrowly pushing it by Republicans. And of course, there's always that discussion, you know, if there is party support from Republicans, but there doesn't end up being overall support by the Republicans in Congress, you know, then you could maybe have that fine line where it's still a party line vote, but you're representing multiple constituencies and multiple parties. But at the same time, this certainly helps the Biden administration. So what I was talking about in terms of how the Biden camp can spin this, I think that the White House has a problem. They know they are unpopular, and they have remained unpopular for the past 2 months now. Taking a look at the approval rating of Joe Biden, this is not good for the Democrats. As Terry McAuliffe can now tell you, voters are very receptive to the approval rating of the President of the United States. If you actually want to take a look at the change back in, let's say we take a look at the beginning of the year. I guess this is going to lag out on me. But if we go to the beginning of the year, I guess we won't be able to go to the beginning of the year. It's not letting me interact with it, unfortunately. Okay, that's quite unfortunate. But you can see here that there was about a significant lead in terms of the Joe Biden approval rating there. And when you actually take a look at the polling data in the state of Virginia, and I want to show you because it shows a near exact swing of what we might see over time. You know what? Actually, let's go back to the 2020 election because this actually explains my point a bit further. When it comes down to the 2020 presidential election, Joe Biden was up 7 points on election day. Well, taking a look at Joe Biden's approval rating now, he's down 8 points nationwide. Well, guess what that swing is? 15 percentage points, right? So when you take a look at the 2021 race in the state of Virginia, you see that Glenn Youngkin won by a margin of 2.2%. Now, that margin of victory is a roughly 12-point swing relative to what the margin of victory was for Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election. So when you see the national swing by 15 points, you start to see very similar results on lower levels. In addition to that, that 15-point swing also translated to the state of New Jersey, which you can check out for yourself. The New York Times will not let me view it without paying for an article, even though I have an account. I just can't seem to get in. I will go ahead and try to do that right after this video because sometimes it works and, I'm logged in fully fine, and sometimes I do not. But we will see what happens. But looking at, New Jersey, you actually saw a 15-point swing. What was a 16-point margin of victory for Joe Biden ended up being actually a 13-point swing, a 3-point margin of victory for the incumbent Democratic governor. Major swings happen because Joe Biden is unpopular. So to see things like this pass in the House of Representatives is a good thing for the Democratic Party. And they should absolutely utilize it as a means of showing their party doing better, as a means of showing that Joe Biden's legislation is passing, that his method of bipartisanship and months of trials and tribulations ultimately result in the passage of a sweeping bill. This is a large one, and I can tell you now there are going to be Republicans that will attack the other Republicans who moved forward with this bill. I'm not going to be surprised by that, but I do think that at the end of the day, many Republicans are going to try to take credit for this bill and the benefits of it, and the fact that it is passed now means that this vote really doesn't matter at this point in time. No average American is going to say, I'm voting for the Republicans now in 2022 because the infrastructure bill only passed with 228 votes. People don't care about the vote tally. All they care about is whether or not things get done and who supported it. Well, in this case, it was Republicans and Democrats. So the approval rating is the most important thing, I think, right now for the Democratic Party. They absolutely have some work that needs to be done. They did it, though, back in 2020. If you take a look at the favorability numbers from before the Democratic National Convention, Joe Biden was negative for months. You're talking 6-7 months, he was in the negative, right? And then the Democratic National Convention happened. What happened there was the Democrats spent millions, tens of millions of dollars, sending out ads all across the nation and live streaming their virtual DNC, where they were able to change the image of Joe Biden. They sent out ads showing his personal life, how he came to be a United States Senator, the story of Joe Biden and his wife prior, the story of Joe Biden as a person. These things that restored a sense of humanity to the presidential ticket. These things that made him seem like a very good person and a very likable person. And as we saw in the numbers, it worked. From then on out, his favorability rating was in the positive until about August of 2021. Until a year later, that's the time it took for the DNC's work to wear off because it was very, very effective. And Democrats need to do that now. People already know the story of Joe Biden. It would be bad to try to tap into that again because it already has been played more than once. But this time, they could talk about his major accomplishments. Rehashing COVID-19 stimulus checks. Yes, that was earlier on in the year. But then you move down. You talk about another type of discussion towards moving towards another COVID-19 bill. You talk about going down further and further down the line. You might find gaps of months where it doesn't seem like major pieces of legislation are passing, which is entirely true. Of course, there are the in-between parts where minor things are getting through, but this infrastructure bill sort of resets the clock for Joe Biden. The clock starts ticking again, and he needs to find another major piece of legislation to pass. Will he find it? Probably. I think that it's something that could happen, but I also think that this is something that makes Joe Biden have another accomplishment by the end of the year that he can flaunt to his constituents, that he can flaunt and Democrats can flaunt around the nation to prevent issues like Virginia's governor race from ever happening again. The Democratic Party needs to hone in on this, and they need to do it effectively. The Democratic Party needs to come together in the way that they did 2 years ago, a year ago, actually, in the Democratic National Convention, and push this as a Joe Biden legislation that is going to benefit all Americans. And if people start to see that rhetoric, and the rhetoric is effective, the public perception of Joe Biden will change, and consequently, Democratic performance will also change. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.